chatting with us. And I'm very, very grateful because Bobbie's a big part of my past, and she is a connection to everything here in Liberty. And we are very, very lucky to have her with us and to tell us all of the wonderful stories that she's going to relate today. So without any further ado, I present my lovely friend, Bobbie Waugh.
Exactly right. I would not have done this had I known it was totally out of hand. But nonetheless, I will try to make it as brief as I can. But when you're doing two histories, which has to be done in this case, it's difficult to do because you cannot do the Valley Players history without doing Ms. Humphrey's history, because that's how we got this facility. And very few people know that. I didn't know it myself until Richard Pickett. I couldn't have done it without him. He's absolutely a genius on Ancestor.com. And I have all of this information beginning with Frank Harden, who was, the reason we have this, was Miss Humphrey's grandfather. Her father didn't live long enough.
Miss Waugh, your mic fell off. I can help you with your mic.
The what?
Your microphone.
It is? Well, I didn't touch it. To do two histories, and I will wander because you overlap sometimes because you have to. So I'll begin, since you asked me to do the Valley Players, I will begin with that. You have to realize that we had Joe and Kalita a very short length of time, just a few years. It seemed like forever, but it wasn't. They came here in 51 and were killed in a plane crash in 54. So that is not very long, but from them, we learned a lot about being a professional theater, although they did not start the Valley Players. In 1953, a man came here to be the manager of Bergville's department store, which turned into the M&P, which is about where the Gazette is. He was only here a year. And he asked that he be allowed to do the first show, which was You Can't Take It With You. Joe was the lead. And of course, he was excellent, as you might know, being a professional actor. And then after that, he left. And we went on, of course it wasn't named at that time, we went on as a little theater. And because of Joe and Kalita, we learned a great deal about professional theater, because they were both actors, and had come from New York. In 1950, Kalita's father died in Galveston, and they married. He died in the beginning of 1950, and in the end of 1950, in December, Joe and Kalita married in New York, at the little church around the corner of New York City. And then they came here in 1951. I am to presume to be with her mother and with the estate that was left. So from there we went on with the Valley Players, and we roamed around like a bunch of gypsies because we didn't have a home. Most of our plays were done at the Sam Houston auditorium. And the disadvantage of that is that it was a very old building. There were no restrooms backstage. And that made it rather awkward because you had to wait till intermission to go to the restroom. So that was one of the drawbacks there, but we did many, many shows there. We made our flats, and when you got through with the show, you had to strike the sets, and because you couldn't leave them there, so we rented a warehouse in West Liberty, and would store the sets and any odd things that we accumulated along the way. Some people would donate furniture or different things. So we did most of our plays there. We did a couple at the high school, but the rent was too high. We did one at the city hall, which was a kind of courtroom scene. We did one at the old abandoned building on Main Street that had no stage, so it had to be a melodrama. And we had to have folding chairs, and of course we only did that one time. But basically, most of our shows were done at the Sam Houston Auditorium until we got a home, which was the abandoned poultry rabbit farm at the fairgrounds. It was an absolutely deplorable condition. Anyway, we restored that home. But that was after Joe and Cleta were killed. That was about the end of '58. But while they were active, the second show, Joe directed Mystery at Greenfingers. And then the same year, Cleta directed Three Men on a Horse. And then in 1954, they didn't stay in Liberty the whole time. They built a home in Hardin. Now, where we're here now, this was their home. This was Seven Pines that Frank Hardin established, and he built a house here. And he and his wife, that was Cynthia O'Brien, lived here till they died. So this was Seven Pines. And when Mrs. Humphrey died in 1961, we'll go back further now, back into, okay, we have Joe and Cleta established. Then they moved to Hardin, and were very active in our organization. According to the Vindicator, they did workshops. I don't remember that, but they did. And they were just invaluable to us. But unfortunately, Joe learned to fly. Typical of novice pilots, you're overconfident, and actors sometimes are. So he hadn't flown that long, and he certainly couldn't fly instruments, and that's a big mistake. Now, bear in mind, if you fly to New York today, it takes 3 hours on a jet. They took off in a private plane. I can't imagine how long it would take, or why you would do it, because it's not comfortable, it's loud. There's certainly no bathroom, and certainly no foods, but he chose to do that. I'm sure Cleta didn't want to go. And they had gotten to Pennsylvania between Harrisburg and Allentown. And evidently, if you're going to fly in a different part of the country, you need to know more about weather conditions. And Abe Miles was very instrumental in helping him learn to fly, I think. So anyway, he did not know instruments. And obviously, he didn't take off on a sunny day, because once he got airborne, what happened to him, he was warned about could happen in that part of the country. And then as you end up like you're in a cotton ball, and if you can't fly instruments, you don't know whether you're going up or down. And whoever heard it on the ground said that motor revved and then the crash. And of course, that was it. But Cleta had been in affairs of state with the Alley, and she commuted, so that was very tiring. And then Joe was made director of the Bicentennial, which was to come off in 1956. And I think he had some papers with him. They had an apartment in New York, a lot of friends in New York, so I'm sure they went for fun as well as to rest. So that was the story of our loss there. And it was tragic, and once it happens, there's not a lot you can do about it. But anyway, the Valley Players rocked on, we did quite a few shows, a lot actually. And then toward the end of '58, we were offered to lease the abandoned Rabbit Poultry Barn, which was in horrible condition. The worst, you can't even imagine how horrible it was. So with all of the stalwart members that we had, we worked so hard, unbelievably hard, to make a nice theater, and it was nice. Of course, it had to be folded chairs, but that's okay. We had a nice stage, we had a nice curtain. The dressing rooms weren't so hot, and a lot of it, no air conditioning, which was rather dreadful. But one Sunday afternoon, Boris Birch came to a matinee. We were doing Ladies in Retirement. Father DeStefano was directing that. He was active, and I don't think anybody remembered that. Bill Rowe directed most of our shows, and he was absolutely beyond a good director. So we did quite a few shows. But Boris Birch said, "Is it always that hot here?" Well, yes, it is. And he put an air conditioner in, which made all the difference in the world. So now that was in, we went in there about the end of '58. And as it progressed, Father DeStefano was going to direct what was he gonna, anyway, he was gonna direct the show. Then he got transferred to Beaumont. So Bill Rowe took that over. And by the time we get in this facility, which was about 1970, Julia had requested to do the first show, which was The Merry Widow in modern dress. So the second show, Father DeStefano had already cast a show, and Bill Rowe took that over. So in 1971, we did Glass Menagerie. In 1972, we did Hello, Dolly, and then the history from then, and you know how many we did after that. But that's the way it started. But the way we got the theater was Miss Humphreys. Her love was this part of the country. She didn't care much for Houston. But unknown to anybody, certainly not her longtime lawyer, which was 8 Miles, unknown to anybody, 3 men came, I think one of them knew Kalita, came out of wherever they came from, and they talked Miss Humphreys, I don't know what they said to her, into changing her will. So she left the book of her estate to Houston for some unknown reason, and that's where Tuts came from. But she left enough here because she always wanted something like this built, a theater particularly. I think she had in mind a museum, but that did not come to pass. So we have a library and a theater that's the envy of any city. And it's gone on and with wonderful, wonderful shows. So that is rather the history of the Valley Players, where we were and are a close-knit group. It's almost like belonging to a sorority in a way, because you become extremely close friends. And it's a wonderful experience, one that has certainly enriched my life. But to go back as to how we got this theater, we go back in Mrs. Humphrey's life. Frank Hardin, who was her grandfather, came here from Tennessee. He was born in 1802, so by the time he came to Texas, it was still under Mexican rule, because he had to leave, he and his 4 brothers had to leave Tennessee because there was a feud between the Porter family and the Hardin family that got pretty intense, and there was a killing, so to speak, and they were going to be blamed, so they had to flee to Mexican rule. And when they did, they came and settled on the Trinity River, and they were everything. They were the mayor, the sheriff, the whole bit. And they were very instrumental in forming this town. So Frank met a darling little French girl named Cynthia O'Brien, and they married, and they had, let's see, there's so much history to that. I've learned more from this than I ever dreamed I would. But Frank married Cynthia. They had 6 children, but only 1 boy and 5 girls, but only 2 girls were ever mentioned. That was Kalita, who was named after the Indian chief of the Coshada tribe, which was very close, and Camilla Gertrude. Well, Camilla Gertrude married George Washington Davis, and he had come from South Carolina as a young lawyer. But he was killed in an accident, not a car for heaven's sake, but some accident, at 63. So he didn't really have time to do a whole lot. But anyway, they had 4 children. They had Agatha, who died in 29. They had George Wirt. They had Camilla. They had Camilla. I can't think of it. I always want to say Gertrude, Camilla, Geraldine, and then they had Percy. Well, Camilla married Robert Wade Humphreys. He had come from Ohio as a young lawyer. And in 1921, he was appointed customs collector at the port of Galveston, which was a very, very prestigious job, appointed by the president. So he had that, which was, so they, of course, lived in Galveston. And the reason nobody knew Kalita, well, is because she was raised in Galveston by the time she was 7. So she went to school there and then went east to school, to a girls' school, and then she ended up in New York as an actress. So she was never really here that much, nor was Ms. Humphreys, until much later after Robert Wade died in 1950. And he was cremated and is buried in the Grace Episcopal Church in Galveston. So Kalita and Joe had come here in 51, I'm sure, to be with her and help with the estate. And of course, we were blessed to have them for a very short period of time. But we learned so much that was so beneficial to us. So we never felt like a fledgling little theater, because we were instructed and around Kalita, don't dare say get or anyway. Oh, because you'd be corrected immediately. It was get and anyway. But anyway, I find myself saying that myself sometimes. But anyway, it's a southern thing. But there's no such word really when you think about it. Anyway. So anyway, see how anyway, that's the way that was. So we really never felt like a fledgling little theater. I don't know how long it was before we named it the Valley Players. We met at the church in Methodist Church Social Hall and decided on the name, and everybody approved, so we were called the Valley Players, and of course still are. So anyway, as time went on, Ms. Humphreys lived to 1961, and Mr. Frank Harden died here. He and Cynthia died here. It was called 7 Pines. And Mrs. Humphreys died here. At that time, there were 2 houses back here. There was one on the east that she lived in and one on the west that Joe and Kalita lived in until they built in Harden. And they never trimmed anything back. So all through the young days, the children called it the jungle, because that's what it looked like. It was very, very overgrown. But that's the way she liked it. So this block of land that we're on as we speak was 7 Pines. Frank Harden loved it. He built a house here, but he died in 1878, and that's how old all of this history is, because it goes way, way, way back to when he fled Tennessee. So this was 7 Pines. So that's how we got this theater. Like I said, Ms. Humphreys left the bulk of her estate to Houston, and Tuts came out of that. But she left enough here for us to have this, and she would have been very proud of that. So we got here in 1970, and you know the history from then on. Julia and Henry were not active in the rabbit barn because Henry had been transferred to Beaumont for a while and commuted, and Julia had a very, very demanding job at the city and just didn't have the time. So when we came here, Julia was into her job and could have time, and then Henry had retired. And it was always so refreshing to see him in the office every day. Just wonderful to see him there. But anyway, Julia did the first show, and then the second and third, and how many we've done since then. But I was sitting by Miss Burson after the funeral in Joe and Cleta's house, and bemoaning the fact, what would we do? And she looked at me in a very matter-of-fact way, and she said, "My dear, there's no one indispensable." And of course, she's right. We went on, in spite of our loss, we've done well, and all of us have died off but me. So, but it's been taken up by a new generation of very, very talented people, very talented. Jeree, Delaney, I still call her Jackie Hartel, Deborah Pickett, I mean, such talent, and they've done such wonderful shows, and I'm sure will continue to do so. So all of that stems back to the very beginning in 1953 of what we'll call the Valley Players, and how it progressed through the Rabbit Barn, which was very, very difficult to restore. It was in such horrible condition. And I didn't realize Sandra Sterling was that active, because I thought she was a teenager. She assured me she was not. And then she was active. And some of the plays were very interesting. Becky asked me to remember any dramatic things that happened. The thing, in my experience, the most dramatic, we were doing Fiddler on the Roof. Hard show to do, big cast, very demanding. The men had to do a Russian dance, which was very, very hard. There was group singing, and it was just a wonderful show, but it was difficult to do. There was, it wasn't a major part, but it was certainly a part that pertained very much to the show. She was Mrs. Laser Wolf, and that was Karen Friend. And she had had theater experience before she came here, and so of course she knew theater. So on opening night, Laura Hartel came to me at 7:15 and said, "Karen Friend isn't here." I said, "Oh, well, don't worry, she will be, she's a pro." At 8:00, Laura Hartel came and said, "Karen Friend is not here." Well, Karen Friend never came, and we never saw her again. And we had to have a Miss Laser Wolf, because it was pertinent to the show. It was the first time I've ever been introduced to a photographic memory. We had a couple that came here with a Methodist church. I think he was a choir director named Charles Tucker, and his wife, I don't know her first name. And she had a photographic memory. And she took that part and never missed a line. It was, to me, it was a miracle. Because Miss Laser Wolf, Henry announced that there would be a delay in the curtain, 15-minute delay, and they made her up, she was a ghost. And this Tucker, I'll call her, never missed a line. It was absolutely amazing. I don't know what we would have done had she not been able to do that, because I'm not sure the show could have gone on without it. It just had a very important role in Ms. Laser Wolf. So that was probably the worst emergency that I remember. Of course, there were forgotten lines, and there were where you went blank and all of that sort of stuff. But we were blessed with good health, and I don't think we had ever had to cancel a show because of somebody getting sick. So all in all, we struggled, we survived, and we are what we are today. And the reason we have this, Frank Harden was the largest landholder in Texas. He owned thousands of acres of land. So evidently oil came in, had to, on a lot of it. His son, George Wirt, carried on that tradition and also bought land. So we're talking about a tremendous amount of land and a tremendous amount of wealth. So we get a grant from the foundation every year. We've never run in the red, and I think that's something to be proud of also. We've always been in the black. We've been hard workers, dedicated, you have to be, because once you commit to a show, you have promised to be there, to learn your lines, and to take direction, even if you don't agree with them. That's what you have pledged to do. So when you do a show, if you have someone that says, oh, I think that'd be fun, you know they're not gonna last. Because it takes real dedication. You have to do some sacrificing. And that's what you owe to the cast. And you say, oh, well, I didn't have a speaking part. Well, that doesn't matter. There'll be an empty spot on the stage if you're not there, regardless of how simple your line is. Because when I directed Hello, Dolly, I had gone to a funeral in Dallas, and I flew home alone because I was doing a rehearsal, and one of the teenagers didn't show up. And I fussed at him. He said, well, I don't say anything. I said, doesn't matter. There was a vacant spot on the stage, and it was very disconcerting. And you have to realize that, and sometimes with teenagers it's hard to do. For a while, we had an orchestra. I know Jim Sterling did it once. Well, of course, he's very musical. Boudier did it for Hello, Dolly, and also for several other shows. But the orchestra got, am I telling this right, Jim? The orchestra got so hard to do that finally we didn't do it anymore. We used some other form of music. But it sure was fun at the time because we had an orchestra pit and it just looked so wonderful to see it there. And I know during Hello, Dolly, we did our own costumes, and that was really an undertaking. And Julia had gone to Baytown, and she had that red dress that Carol Channing wore in the Harmonium Garden scene, duplicated exactly. And it was absolutely stunning. In fact, she was buried in it, which I would have presumed. So we did all that. We did we had several scene changes. Harmonium Gardens was a really good scene. It was such a pleasure to create a show and see it come off. I guess my favorite part that I ever did was Mame. I call Sandra Kittrell Mame to this day, and she calls me Vera, which of course I love. But it was a fun show to do. Basically, I would say that all of the shows we've done are fun. it just is a camaraderie that is hard to explain. So I think I've told you the basic facts, particularly how we got this with Frank Harden and poor George Washington departed so young. And of course, Miss Humphreys lived to be 84. She died in 1961 at 84. And so, on a happier note, Joe and Kalita had asked Alec and me to go to the artillery ball in Galveston. We spent the weekend in Galveston with them, which was certainly a wonderful experience. But to tell this story that only I would know because I was the only one there, shows her free spirit and Miss Humphreys' humorous side. We went to the artillery ball, and Kalita and I are standing there, and I don't know his first name, but the one of the prominent families of Galveston that I'm sure she grew up with asked her to dance, and she said in a very soft voice, no. And he said, now Kalita, why don't you dance with me? And she looked at him in a very sweet way and said, because I don't want to. Well, so the next day we were to meet Miss Humphrey at a little kind of rundown looking, I guess it was a bar, but the old Galvestonians went there, no tourists. So we met her there, and when we walked in, she was saying in a very loud voice, because she had ordered a martini, and she said, and don't put a big olive in it, it takes up too much room. So that was, Miss Humphreys was fun. And she lived 7 years after her daughter died. And she chose, for some unknown reason, to bury them at Fairlawn. Who knows why? Nobody before or after was ever buried there. And there weren't many graves there at that time. And Kalita was cremated and Joe was not. So she decided that she didn't want Kalita there, so she herself took Kalita's ashes to Galveston and had them interred in the Episcopal Church along with Robert Wade Humphreys, her father. And when Miss Humphreys died in 1961, her funeral was, she died here 7 times. Her funeral was in Galveston, and she was cremated and is also buried there. So, why she chose Fairlawn, nobody was ever buried there before or since. But when you go in on the little road, you go almost to the end and off to the right, and the stone is obscured by bushes right now, but that's their headstone, and that's where they were buried in the beginning. So without Richard, I couldn't have known all that because he went in depth in Ancestry.com, and all of it's written down. I guess I ought to bring it in case anybody wanted to see it because it's so extremely interesting. Of all of the history from Frank all clear down to now. And that is the history, as far as I know, of the Valley Players and of this wonderful facility. I've enjoyed going down memory lane with you. It's been certainly wonderful for me, and thank you. That's all I know.
We want to thank everybody for coming and enjoying Bobbie with us. It was our delight to include